In September of 1996, the old Draper estate stood quiet on the outskirts of Asheville, North Carolina. The house, a sprawling two-story colonial with weathered shutters and creeping ivy, had been in the family for over a century. Within its walls lived 81-year-old Ellen Draper, widow of the late Charles Draper, a once prominent attorney known for his ruthless litigation style and airtight contracts. Ellen had long been regarded as the matriarch, the guardian of legacy and lineage, but time had not been kind to her body. After a series of minor strokes and a fall that left her confined to a wheelchair, she knew the end was near. The family had returned, summoned not by love, but by a quiet urgency that lingered beneath polite smiles and rehearsed condolences. Her three children, Scott, Linda, and Thomas, each arrived with subtle posturing and carefully chosen words. They brought their children too, including Joshua, the youngest grandson, fresh out of college with uncertain ambitions and a glint of entitlement in his eyes. The house, once filled with warmth and noise, now breathed a heavy silence, punctuated only by the clinking of teacups and the murmur of inheritance speculation. Ellen spoke little in those final weeks. Her words, once sharp and commanding, had softened into brief murmurs and prolonged pauses. But she wrote constantly. Pages and pages filled her desk drawers, the strokes of her pen erratic yet purposeful. By nightfall, she would sit by the window, a wool shawl over her shoulders, scribbling letters, notes, and what appeared to be confessions. No one asked what she was writing. No one cared to read. The only person who treated her like a human being, rather than an aging vault of assets, was Jenny Caldwell, her nurse. Jenny was a quiet woman in her 40s, a lifelong Asheville resident with calloused hands and a calm presence. Ellen had once called her the only harbor in a sea of vultures. Jenny never pried, never assumed, and never looked at the house with the eyes of a future owner. She simply helped. Unknown to her children, Ellen had contacted someone else in her final weeks, a man named Dane Winslow. A retired federal agent turned private investigator, Dane had once uncovered white-collar crimes in Washington and political sabotage in Atlanta. Ellen met with him in secret, asking for a final service. The nature of her request remained known only to him, but whatever it was, it had nothing to do with preserving family peace. Rather, it was about revelation, retribution. As the leaves began to fall and the shadows lengthened across the lawn, the house took on an atmosphere of tense expectancy. The ticking of clocks felt louder, the creaking of floorboards more deliberate. Every glance between family members held layers of history, betrayal, and calculation. None of them knew what Ellen had set in motion, but they felt something closing in. The morning after Ellen Draper's funeral, her family returned to the house, dressed in muted grays and navy blues, carrying grief that looked more like fatigue than sorrow. The parlor had been arranged with extra chairs, coffee trays, and polished crystal glasses, as if preparing for a reading of something sacred. They gathered in a loose circle, their postures guarded but expectant. The air was thick with anticipation, not of remembrance, but of entitlement. They had come not to mourn, but to claim. Everyone assumed that the division would be predictable. The Draper estate, an elegant but aging house, multiple accounts, bonds, and a portfolio of properties, would be distributed equally among the three children. Scott had already spoken with a broker. Linda had contacted an interior designer. Thomas had glanced too many times at the antique clock above the mantel, calculating its auction value. Even the younger generation lingered in the hallway, feigning indifference while listening closely. Then the front door creaked open, and Dane Winslow stepped inside. He looked out of place in the room full of relatives, not just because of his dark suit and weathered face, but because he carried no condolences, only a worn leather briefcase. The family exchanged confused glances, murmurs rising like steam. He introduced himself with formal precision and took a seat at the head of the table without asking. The usual lawyer, Mr. Burnham, stood beside him, eyes unreadable, holding a sealed envelope. Winslow placed 3 folders on the table, each neatly labeled. He then reached into his case and retrieved a small cassette recorder. With the push of a button, the room filled with a static hum, followed by the unmistakable voice of Ellen Draper. Her tone was calm, steady, unflinching. "If you're hearing this," she began, "I am no longer with you. But my voice remains, and so does the truth. The truth, I have found, is rarely welcome in this family." The silence that followed was not respectful. It was uneasy. Chairs shifted, eyes darted. Someone cleared their throat. The weight of her words settled like dust across the hardwood floor. Winslow stopped the tape. He then handed the envelope to Mr. Burnham and addressed the room. The legal will, he explained, was valid and complete, but it was only half the story. The other half, the true context, the final intention, was contained in documents he had prepared during the last weeks of Ellen's life. These would not be distributed until the family heard everything she had asked him to uncover. He did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. The mere suggestion that there were secrets yet to be revealed shifted the tone of the gathering. What had been a formality became something else entirely, a reckoning. No one spoke. No one dared. The room, once filled with confident assumption, now held only the sound of ticking clocks and the faint creak of the old house adjusting its weight. The legacy of Ellen Draper had not come to rest. It had come to speak. Dane Winslow opened the first of the folders with methodical precision. The room, once tight with anticipation, now leaned into a silence that bordered on dread. What followed was not a dramatic confrontation, but a slow, deliberate dismantling of the Draper family's carefully constructed facade. He began with Thomas. For the past 3 years, Thomas had been managing one of the smaller family endowments, the Draper Historical Fund, established in Ellen's name to support local preservation efforts. On paper, it appeared dormant, with modest donations and routine expenses. In truth, Thomas had rerouted a substantial portion of the fund into shell corporations based in Delaware and Nevada. The money had financed not only personal investments, but also apartments leased in the names of 2 different women. The documents Winslow provided included bank statements, wire transfers, and images of handwritten notes detailing coded withdrawals. Thomas's hands clenched in his lap as the evidence spread across the table. Next came Linda. Winslow revealed that over the past 18 months, Linda had been acquiring power of attorney documents under the guise of assisting Ellen with estate planning. Using her mother's shaky signature, she had initiated the sale of minor properties, small parcels of land, old family shares, pieces of artwork, through a network of businesses she controlled behind other names. The pattern was consistent. Ellen had trusted her daughter to help navigate the bureaucracy of aging, and instead, Linda had used that trust to line her own portfolio. Copies of notarized forms were laid out beside internal emails from Linda's law office, confirming asset transfers that Ellen had never spoken of. Scott's betrayal was quieter but more personal. He had long presented himself as the uninvolved sibling, the one who stayed on the periphery, never demanding, never plotting. But Winslow brought forward a collection of letters, each written in Ellen's frail cursive. In them, she begged him to stop mortgaging the family home. Scott, it turned out, had used the house, her sanctuary, as collateral on a failing chain of recreational vehicle dealerships. Each loan was larger than the last. Her pleas, written with desperation and the heartbreak of a mother losing trust, had gone unanswered. Scott stared at the letters without blinking. Finally, Winslow turned to the youngest, Joshua. The family had praised him as the only one interested in the intellectual legacy of the Drapers. He had taken it upon himself to curate Ellen's private library. But beneath that facade of archival preservation was a different truth. Winslow presented screenshots from online auctions, private sales, and anonymous listings, all tracing back to rare volumes missing from Ellen's shelves. First editions, annotated manuscripts, family heirlooms in the form of books, sold piece by piece to private collectors. Some bore Ellen's notes in the margins. Others had library stamps older than the house itself. Joshua looked down, unable to meet anyone's gaze. As Winslow concluded his presentation, he did not raise his voice or offer commentary. The evidence spoke for itself. Receipts, letters, transfers, scanned documents, timestamps. The pile grew as the shame thickened. It was not merely a financial reckoning, but a moral one. Each revelation chipped away at the illusion that this family had preserved even a fraction of the decency Ellen had once tried to instill. There were no interruptions, only the shifting of feet, the tightening of jaws, the occasional flicker of disbelief. The walls of the house, once adorned with portraits and pride, seemed to lean inward, listening. And in that heavy stillness, it felt as though Ellen herself was present, her voice echoing not through the recorder, but through the weight of every page, every broken truth. When Dane Winslow finished laying out the last of the evidence, the room felt hollow. The silence that followed was no longer tense, but stunned, quiet in the way a battlefield is quiet after the final shot. He reached for a fourth folder, thinner than the rest, and calmly stated that there was another will, a second document, drafted and notarized just 3 days before Ellen Draper's death. Unlike the one previously expected and ceremonially handed to the family attorney, this version held the full legal weight. Its original copy was secured in a safe deposit box at Blue Ridge National Bank, with an accompanying letter in Ellen's own handwriting. Winslow read aloud the addendum she had written. In it, Ellen stated clearly and without embellishment that her children and grandchildren had failed to see her as anything more than a source of wealth and obligation. Only one person, she wrote, had looked her in the eyes without calculation. Only one had stayed not for gain, but for kindness. To Jenny Caldwell, her nurse, caregiver, and companion in the last years of her life, Ellen bequeathed everything: the house, the properties, the accounts, and the rights to the Draper name. The reaction was instant and volatile. Chairs scraped against the floor. Protests erupted, some indignant, some incredulous. Linda demanded to see a copy. Scott scoffed and shook his head, muttering accusations of manipulation. Thomas slammed a fist on the table, insisting that his mother must have been coerced, unstable. Joshua stared blankly, as if unable to process what had just been said. But Winslow remained composed. He placed a certified copy of the new will on the table, accompanied by timestamps, notarization, video footage from the bank, and a signed physician's evaluation confirming Ellen's mental clarity on the date of signing. There was no room for contest. Ellen had planned this with foresight and legal precision. To her children and grandchildren, she had left tokens. To Scott, a folded wall tapestry from the upstairs study, an heirloom bearing the embroidered words, "Silence is betrayal." To Linda, a family photo album in which every image of her had been carefully cut out, leaving only the surrounding figures. To Thomas, a torn check originally written for $1 million, voided and ripped down the center. To Joshua, a rare book from the Draper Library, an 1856 volume on family estates, its title page burned, the inscription beneath it scorched into illegibility save for one surviving line: "Betrayal is not worth ink." No further explanation was needed. The fury that followed was immediate. Legal threats were shouted across the room. Linda insisted they would sue for undue influence. Scott accused Jenny of orchestrating everything. Thomas swore he would take the matter to the press. Joshua simply left, the burned book still in his hands. But the facts were unshakable. Ellen had accounted for every protest, every angle of attack. Her paper trail was immaculate. Winslow had anticipated every question before it was asked. The house, once brimming with veiled expectation, now pulsed with rage and disbelief. Yet Ellen's presence seemed more alive than ever. In the folds of the drapes she once dusted by hand. In the shadows of the hallway portraits she had selected herself. In the dust-laden beams where her voice had once echoed, calling for coffee, for quiet, for someone to listen. Her ghost lingered not in superstition, but in certainty. Every room had become a monument to the woman who had seen through them all, and she had spoken her final truth, etched not in bitterness, but in clarity, not in vengeance, but in legacy. The legal battle began just days after the reading of the second will. Fueled by humiliation and disbelief, Ellen Draper's heirs filed an immediate challenge in Buncombe County Probate Court, alleging undue influence, mental incompetence, and fraud. The Draper family, once known for discretion and status, became the centerpiece of a quiet scandal that quickly grew louder. Headlines appeared in local newspapers and spread to regional outlets. Heiress nurse or mastermind? Ellen Draper's last gambit, family disinherited. Justice from the grave? Public curiosity escalated with each court date. The proceedings stretched on for months. Attorneys for Scott, Linda, Thomas, and Joshua employed every available tactic. They painted Jenny Caldwell as an opportunist who preyed on a vulnerable elderly woman. They accused Dane Winslow of manufacturing evidence, claiming the videos and signed papers had been forged or staged. They brought in handwriting analysts, expert witnesses, even a retired psychologist who had never treated Ellen but offered speculative theories about age-related cognitive decline. But the facts did not waver. The defense presented Ellen's medical records, which documented a sharp and functioning mind until her final days. Multiple doctors confirmed her mental clarity, including 2 independent evaluations requested by Ellen herself prior to signing the revised will. The bank footage showed her walking slowly but unaided into the vault room, nodding clearly as she verified the documents. Her voice on tape was unmistakable, firm, articulate, and aware. Each form bore her unmistakable signature, matched precisely to those from earlier years. Notarizations, time-stamped filings, and even a video of her dictating the final terms to Winslow were submitted to the court. The judge, a reserved man with little tolerance for theatrics, listened with growing impatience as the plaintiffs recycled arguments already disproven. He reviewed every document, asked meticulous questions, and made it clear that emotion would not sway legal interpretation. When the verdict was finally rendered, the courtroom was still. The second will was upheld in full. Jenny Caldwell left the courthouse surrounded by reporters. Flashbulbs popped, microphones crowded her face. She looked hollow, as though the months of accusation and scrutiny had taken something vital from her. In her only public statement, spoken through trembling lips, she said she had done nothing more than offer comfort to a dying woman who had no one else. She hadn't known the scope of Ellen's preparations, nor asked for anything. She had simply done her job, day after day, without expectation. Public opinion split down the middle. Some saw Jenny as a thief in nurses' scrubs, others as a quiet guardian of dignity. The media's fascination continued for weeks. Commentators dissected every angle. Talk shows invited estate lawyers to speculate on the implications. But beneath the noise, the result remained immovable. Ellen Draper had anticipated every counter, every accusation, and fortified her final will with such precision that even the best legal minds couldn't dismantle it. Her children retreated from the spotlight, bitter and bruised, their reputations frayed. The Draper name, once synonymous with power in Asheville, now carried a different weight, an asterisk of scandal and judgment. Ellen had not only divided her wealth, but dismantled the illusion of harmony that surrounded it. She had spoken once more through the courtroom, with the same resolve she had used in life, and reminded them all that love forged in greed is not love at all. A year had passed since the courtroom verdict had closed the final chapter of Ellen Draper's will. The estate, once a symbol of generational wealth and quiet power, had taken on a new life. Under Jenny Caldwell's stewardship, the Draper house no longer hosted private dinners or silent arguments behind closed doors. It had become something else entirely: the Hearthlight residence, a sanctuary for elderly women who had been discarded, mistreated, or forgotten by their own families. The transformation was both physical and emotional. Jenny had kept the bones of the house intact: the oak staircases, the leaded glass windows, the parlor fireplace, but softened its sharpness. Bedrooms were converted into private suites, each bearing the name of a flower instead of a number. The dining room became a communal space where residents shared home-cooked meals and stories, their laughter rising into the same rafters that once echoed only with footsteps and strained conversations. The walls were painted in warm tones, and sunlight was invited in rather than blocked out by heavy drapes. Still, the house retained its memory. In the library, above the hearth, where Ellen once kept her rare books, hung a simple wooden plaque. The words carved into it were Ellen's own: "A house should love you back." Visitors often paused in front of it without knowing the full story. Some felt its weight instinctively, as if the house itself was offering a quiet promise of safety. The plaque became the spiritual center of the home, an unspoken creed for every woman who walked through its doors seeking a place to belong. Dane Winslow never returned to the estate after the final papers were signed. He had closed his office shortly after the trial, placing a single key and a short note on his desk before locking the door behind him. The case of Ellen Draper, he admitted to no one in particular, had been his final assignment. It had drained something elemental from him, not in exhaustion, but in completion. He had seen justice take a long and winding path, not through anger or vengeance, but through intention and preparation. It was a kind of justice that lingered, uncelebrated and deeply personal. The Draper family splintered in the months that followed. There were no more holiday reunions or birthday calls. Scott relocated to Arizona, citing a desire for distance. Linda moved into a gated community in Florida and rarely answered calls. Thomas declared bankruptcy and left town entirely. Joshua kept to himself, quietly selling off the remnants of his ambitions. None of them ever visited the house again, but occasionally one of them would drive past the corner where the estate stood behind its wrought iron gate. They never stopped. They never looked long. Their eyes would shift to the road, as if to avoid the weight of memory pressing against the windshield. And yet the house remained. Solid, present, alive with its new purpose. It no longer whispered with secrets, but hummed with quiet conversation and the clinking of teacups. The spirits it held were not of the vengeful kind, but of a woman who had chosen truth in silence, love in solitude, and justice in stillness. Ellen Draper had orchestrated not only a legacy, but a lesson. The house, once heavy with judgment, now breathed with grace. And though no one said it aloud, it was understood by those who lived there and by those who dared remember it from afar. The house remembered everything, and it kept its promises.